It was supposed to be a quick visit, but when my friend's mom pulled me in for just one more hug, I realized some goodbyes aren't meant to be simple. I hadn't planned on staying long that afternoon. Honestly, I just dropped by to see if my friend was around, maybe kill some time before heading home. But when I rang the doorbell, it wasn't him who opened the door. It was his mother. She stood there in the doorway with that graceful poise she always carried. Not the stiff kind, but the natural kind that makes you feel like you've stepped into a calmer world. Her hair was brushed back neatly, though a few strands framed her face in a way that softened her sharp cheekbones. She looked surprised to see me at first, then her lips curved into a warm smile that seemed to pull me in before she even said a word. "Oh," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's you. Come in, don't just stand out there." For a second, I thought about excusing myself, saying I'd just come back later when my friend was home. But she stepped aside, holding the door open with that quiet confidence, and her hand brushed my arm lightly as I passed. That single touch was nothing, polite, casual, but the warmth of it stayed on my skin a little longer than it should have. The house felt different without my friend around. Quieter, warmer somehow. Maybe it was the soft fragrance drifting through the hallway. Something floral, faint but unmistakably hers. I could hear the slow hum of a clock from the living room, the faint clink of glass in the kitchen. It wasn't the rowdy place I was used to when my friend was there. It felt more private. She motioned toward the couch. "Sit for a bit. He should be back soon. You don't have to wait outside like a stranger." I nodded, but inside, a small knot of hesitation tightened. This wasn't exactly common ground for me, being here without him. Yet the way she carried herself made it feel less like an intrusion and more like an invitation I didn't want to turn down. As I sat, I caught myself studying the details I'd never really noticed before. The way her bracelets caught the light when she pushed her sleeves back. The faint lines near her eyes that only made her smile seem wiser, gentler. She wasn't just my friend's mom in that moment. She was a woman who filled a room with quiet presence. She asked me if I wanted something to drink, and though I tried to say no, she gave me that look, the kind that made refusal impossible. "You're here now," she said softly. "Let me take care of you." And just like that, I stayed. I told myself it was nothing, just a polite visit, a harmless conversation. But deep down, something about her tone, the steadiness in her gaze, the way her touch lingered ever so slightly when she handed me a glass of water, it felt like the afternoon had shifted into something I couldn't quite name yet. She disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, and I heard the soft rustle of cabinets opening, the click of porcelain cups. I offered to help, but she waved me in with that graceful ease. "Come on, don't just sit out there by yourself. Keep me company." I followed her into the kitchen. The late afternoon light spilled through the window, painting the counters in a soft gold. It was quiet except for the kettle beginning to hiss on the stove. I leaned against the doorway, unsure whether I belonged there, but she turned and smiled at me as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You take your tea with sugar, don't you?" she asked. I blinked. "You remembered?" She gave a small laugh, that kind of laugh that feels like it settles deep inside your chest. "I pay attention," she said simply, reaching for the sugar jar. There was something disarming about the way she said it. Not playful, not overly serious, but as if she wanted me to know I was seen. That realization stirred something quiet but strong inside me. I stepped closer to the counter as she poured the steaming tea into cups. The scent rose between us, warm and familiar. When she handed me mine, her fingers brushed against mine. Just a second, just enough. But the heat from her skin was far stronger than the cup itself. We sat at the small kitchen table, and for a while, the conversation was light. She asked about my classes, laughed when I joked about nearly falling asleep in lectures. But slowly, as minutes stretched, the talk grew quieter, more personal. She told me about the books she'd been reading, her voice softening as she described them. I noticed how intently she listened when I spoke, leaning in slightly, her chin resting on her hand. And somewhere between my words and hers, the space between us seemed to shrink. The clink of her spoon against the cup was the only sound for a moment. She set it down carefully, her fingers tracing the rim as though she needed something to occupy them. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long before she looked away, pretending to focus on the steam rising from her tea. I felt it then, that subtle shift. The air carried a quiet charge, something unspoken but undeniably there. I tried to steady myself, telling my thoughts to calm down, reminding myself who she was. But when she laughed softly at one of my clumsy stories, reaching across the table to tap the back of my hand with her fingertips, I swear the whole room felt different. Her touch wasn't long, just a fleeting brush. Yet it was enough to make my pulse quicken. She noticed. I could tell by the faint curve of her lips, the way her eyes flickered to mine and then away again. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a kind gesture, a small laugh, a bit of tea. But when silence settled again and we simply sat there, gazes drifting back to each other without trying, I realized that nothing about this was ordinary anymore. The tea had long cooled, but neither of us seemed in a rush to move. The late light shifted across the kitchen floor, shadows stretching softly along the tiles. We had drifted into that kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the kind that hummed quietly between two people who didn't feel the need to fill every pause. She set her cup down with a faint clink, her fingers lingering on the handle as though she wasn't quite ready to let it go. Her eyes lowered, lashes catching the light, and for the first time that afternoon her composure slipped just a little. "You know," she said softly, "the house feels so different these days. Quieter than I ever expected." I tilted my head. "Because your son's out more?" She gave a small nod, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. "He's growing up. He doesn't need me around in the same way anymore. He's always with friends, chasing his own life. Which is good, it's what I want for him." Her voice caught slightly, and she pressed her palm against her cup again, as if for warmth. But still, sometimes the silence feels heavier than it should. Her honesty struck me. I had never really thought of her that way. Not as someone who could be lonely, someone who missed the simple chaos of having her son home. She always seemed so self-assured, so steady. And now, here she was, letting me see the quiet space beneath all that poise. I leaned forward a little, resting my arms on the table. "That must be hard," I said gently. She looked at me then, really looked, as though she wasn't expecting someone to understand. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Instead, she gave the faintest shake of her head, as if embarrassed by her own admission. "I shouldn't be saying this to you," she murmured. "Why not?" I asked, my voice lower now. "I don't mind listening." Her hand twitched slightly on the table, then stilled. She drew in a breath, her shoulders rising slowly before falling again. "Because you're young. You shouldn't have to listen to someone like me, rambling about things like this." There was a crack in her voice she tried to hide with a smile, but I could hear it, that thin line between composure and confession. Something inside me shifted. I wanted to ease that heaviness, to take even a fraction of it from her. I reached across the table without thinking, letting my fingers brush lightly against hers. Her hand was warm, her skin soft, and though I half expected her to pull away, she didn't. Instead, her fingers stilled under mine, and her eyes lifted slowly to meet my gaze. In that moment, the room was utterly still. No ticking clock, no kettle hiss, nothing but the quiet electricity of closeness. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The vulnerability in her eyes was enough, and the silence between us said more than words ever could. Her hand remained beneath mine for longer than I'd expected. Neither of us spoke, but the silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, filled with all the things we weren't daring to say. Finally, she pulled her hand back gently, her eyes softening as if she were gathering herself again. She rose from the table and walked to the sink, rinsing her cup slowly, almost as though she needed something to do with her hands. I sat there, watching her in the fading golden light, and something about the curve of her shoulders, the stillness in her movements, made my chest ache. When she turned back to me, her smile was there again, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, almost to herself, "for listening." I stood, unsure of what to do with the weight in the room. Words felt too small. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, that I could feel every ounce of her quiet loneliness, that I wished I could take it away, but all of that felt impossible to say aloud. And then, before I could think, she closed the distance between us. Her arms slipped around me in a sudden embrace, warm and steady. It startled me at first, the way she pressed against me without hesitation, but the moment her cheek rested lightly against my shoulder, everything inside me stilled. Her perfume was soft, floral, wrapping around me just as firmly as her arms did. I froze for only a second before my body responded on its own. My arms came up, holding her carefully, almost afraid I might break the fragile balance of the moment. She held on tighter, her fingers resting gently against my back, not rushing to let go. The world outside seemed to fall away. It wasn't just a hug. It was something deeper, the way her heartbeat pressed faintly against my chest, the way her breath slowed, as if she found some comfort in the closeness. I could feel her warmth seeping into me, and with it came a rush of emotions I couldn't sort out. There was tenderness, yes, but also an undercurrent of longing neither of us dared name. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, reluctant. Her hands lingered at my arms before slipping away. For a moment, she kept her gaze lowered, as though she wasn't ready to look me in the eyes. When she finally did, there was a softness there that hadn't been before, something unspoken, fragile, but undeniable. I managed a small smile, though my heart was racing. "I didn't mind that," I said quietly, almost joking, but my voice betrayed the sincerity underneath. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Neither did I." And with those few words, the air between us shifted again. What was once casual, polite, almost maternal, now carried a new weight. A closeness we both felt but hadn't acknowledged until her arms wrapped around me. It was only a hug, but it was also the moment where everything changed. The hug had left a quiet heaviness in the air, the kind that makes you second-guess every word, every movement. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself that this was just a moment, nothing more. But the truth was, I could still feel the ghost of her arms around me, still breathe in the faint trace of her perfume clinging to my shirt. Eventually, I glanced at the clock on the wall and cleared my throat. "I should probably get going," I said, though a part of me didn't want to move at all. She nodded, almost too quickly, as if agreeing before her heart had the chance to protest. "Of course, you've probably got things to do." But her tone carried a softness, a hesitation. She walked with me toward the front door, her steps unhurried, as though she was trying to stretch out the last few minutes. The house was still, except for the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath our feet. My hand brushed the wall as I walked, grounding myself, because every step toward the door felt strangely heavy. When we reached the entryway, I bent to slip on my shoes. She stood just behind me, close enough that I could sense her presence without turning around. And when I did straighten up, I found her watching me, not in the casual way she usually did, but with a gaze that lingered a fraction too long. I smiled awkwardly, trying to ease the tension. "Thanks for the tea." Her lips curved, but her eyes betrayed her. "You're welcome," she said softly. Then, almost as if she couldn't help herself, she reached up and smoothed the collar of my shirt, her fingertips brushing against the side of my neck. It was such a small gesture, but my breath caught. The warmth of her touch lingered long after her fingers dropped away. Neither of us spoke for a moment. The silence stretched, thick with all the words that didn't belong, words that would have been too much, too dangerous. And yet, neither of us stepped back. I turned slightly, my hand already on the doorknob. That should have been the end, a polite goodbye, a smile, and then distance. But as I shifted to pull the door open, I felt the lightest touch at my wrist. Her fingers curled around me gently, stopping me. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, and there she was, standing just close enough that I could see the faint tremble in her hand, the way her eyes shone with something she couldn't quite hide. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you really have to go so soon?" The words caught me off guard, simple yet heavy with meaning. For a moment, I just stood there, heart thundering in my chest, caught between the world outside that door and the world waiting behind me. It was only a question, only a hand on my wrist. But in that suspended moment, it felt like everything hung in the balance. Her hand on my wrist was gentle, almost uncertain, but it carried more weight than if she had spoken volumes. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze, and in her eyes I saw something that unsettled me, a quiet ache, a hesitation balanced between restraint and longing. I started, but the words tangled in my throat. What could I possibly say? That I wanted to stay? That leaving suddenly felt wrong. She shook her head lightly, her lips parting as though she was about to laugh at her own boldness, but no laughter came. Instead, she whispered, almost playfully but with something deeper in her tone, "Just one more hug." The request hit me harder than I expected. It sounded so simple, so harmless, but in the silence between us, It carried a gravity neither of us could ignore. Before I could think, she stepped closer and slipped her arms around me again. This hug was different. It wasn't the quick, casual embrace from before. This one was slower, heavier, as if she was allowing herself to linger. Her body pressed lightly against mine, her hands resting on my back, her fingers curling just slightly into the fabric of my shirt. I felt the rise and fall of her breath against my chest, warm and steady, though there was the faintest tremor hidden inside it. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment. The scent of her perfume wrapped around me, soft and delicate, blending with the warmth of her touch. Every sense sharpened. The way her cheek brushed lightly against my shoulder, the faint sound of her breathing near my ear, the subtle pressure of her arms refusing to let me go too quickly. My own hands settled at her waist, tentative at first, then firmer as though my body was answering something my mind dared not name. I felt her relax into the hold, her head tilting just slightly closer. The hug stretched on, no longer bound by politeness or excuse. Time seemed to stall in that quiet hallway. It wasn't about saying goodbye anymore. It was about holding on, about allowing a closeness that both of us had been careful to deny. My heart pounded, every beat loud in my chest, and I wondered if she could feel it. Maybe she could, because I felt hers too, steady but insistent, a rhythm echoing against mine. When she finally pulled back, it was with reluctance, her hands lingering at my arms, sliding down slowly as though she couldn't quite bring herself to let go. Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them was something unspoken but undeniable, a truth we were both too careful to voice. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but it carried no lightness, only depth. "There," she whispered, almost as if to convince herself. "Just one more." But as I stood there, still caught in the warmth of her embrace, I knew, and so did she, that it hadn't been just a hug at all. The air between us felt changed after that embrace, as though the walls of the house themselves had absorbed the silence and held it in place. Neither of us spoke right away. She stepped back half a pace, but her hands lingered against my arms for a moment longer, fingertips brushing as if reluctant to break the last thread of contact. I tried to find something to say, something light to cut through the weight in the room, but every word that rose in my throat felt clumsy. So instead, I just stood there, heart still racing, watching her. Her smile was soft, but there was a trace of something in it. A vulnerability she hadn't shown me before, a quiet admission that couldn't be spoken aloud. She lowered her gaze, smoothing her hair back behind her ear with a small, steadying breath. "You should go," she said gently, though her voice carried more hesitation than certainty. "Before it gets too late." I nodded, but my hand didn't move from the doorknob. It was strange. Minutes ago, I'd been ready to leave without a second thought, but now, standing there with her, every step away felt like the wrong direction. Finally, I turned the handle. The door creaked slightly, letting in a faint draft of evening air. Yet even as the night beckoned, I felt her presence holding me back. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, and there she was, standing with her arms folded loosely, but her eyes still locked on me. Her gaze softened when our eyes met. "Take care of yourself," she said quietly. Something about the way she spoke it, not as a casual farewell, but as if she truly meant it, as if the words carried a piece of her heart, made me pause. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "You too." For a beat, neither of us moved. I could feel the invisible line between us, stretched taut, fragile, but undeniable. Then, with the smallest of smiles, she lifted her hand in a half-wave, a gesture both final and unfinished. I stepped out, the cool evening brushing against my skin, yet her warmth clung to me. The faint trace of her perfume lingered on my shirt, and as I walked down the quiet street, I couldn't shake the echo of her arms around me, the steadiness of her heartbeat pressed against mine. I told myself it had been just a hug. Twice. That was all. But deep inside, I knew better. The silence, the glances, the way neither of us wanted to let go. It had been something else entirely. Something fragile, unspoken, yet alive. By the time I reached the end of the street, I realized the memory of that moment wasn't fading. It was settling deeper, etched into me. And though I didn't know what it meant, or where it might lead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That goodbye hadn't really been an ending. It had been the beginning of something neither of us had expected, but neither of us would forget. Sparkles, if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romance tales. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever felt a goodbye that wasn't really the end? Sparkles.